Welcome back to my channel, Beautiful Minutia. If you're new here, my name is Tiffany, and today I'm going to be talking about all the books that I read in the month of January. So it's interesting because I finished 6 books in the month of January, and one of those was a manga. So that looks like I didn't read all that much, but I actually read over 1,000 pages worth of books that I'm not even going to be talking about in this wrap up, because one of them I finished on February 3rd and the other one won't be finished till towards the end of February. But between those 2 books, there was another like 1,400 pages worth of books that I'm not even talking about. So I just thought that was kind of funny. I'm just going to go in order of the books that I finished when I finished them. So that's going to start with Goodbye Things, and this is a book about minimalism, and it's written by a Japanese man. His first name's Fumio, and I can't remember what the last name is, but should be up here on the screen. So I have not ever been a minimalist, and I don't really ever want to be a minimalist, but I get that declutter bug in January and February every year where I just want to start getting rid of stuff. And I think part of that is Christmas time and an influx of things in my home, and it just makes me want to clear out to make room for the new things, or whatever. So I was really interested to read this book. It was recommended to me by a friend, and I was really happy that I read it. This is not really the same as a Marie Kondo type style, even though they're both Japanese. They both probably have very similar approaches to minimalism, but he's really sharing his own story and how he found minimalism and how he found that an excess of things in his life was really bogging him down and making him depressed and anxious. And so a lot of the book is very much about his journey, and then some statistical things about minimalism versus kind of more of a messy maximalism, kind of like keeping up with the Joneses kind of a lifestyle. That's not really the lifestyle that I tend to live, and I am a very sentimental human, and so I really like holding on to things. And then there's this part of me that's like, well, what if this breaks, and I have a backup of certain things that are really important to me. But it was really interesting listening to him talk about his approach to minimalism, because he ended up getting rid of all of his books because he realized that the books that he owned were kind of like posturing of like bookshelves full of books, so it made him look really smart and those kinds of things. And he talked about how the point of minimalism is not to say you have X amount of things. Like Marie Kondo talks about how you shouldn't have more than like 30 books in your house or something like that. And his approach is not that you shouldn't have that many books or that you should only have a certain number of certain things. His point is getting rid of the excess things that you're spending your energy on, so that way the things that you do own are things that bring value and joy to your life. Which I guess is also kind of Marie Kondo, because she talks about whether or not things spark joy. So there's still some similarities there, but I just found it really interesting because, the books that I have do bring me a lot of joy and add a lot of value to my life, even the ones I haven't read yet. I have like a plethora of books to choose from and to be able to read, and books that I want to reread and all of those kinds of things. So that's not an area that I really foresee myself doing a whole lot of decluttering or being anything close to minimal. But there is a lot of value in not having the upkeep for things that are just bringing stress and not joy to your life. So I just really enjoyed reading it. The next book that I completed in the month of January is Piranesi by Susanna Clarke. This is my second Susanna Clarke. Last fall I read Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell, and really loved that. If you've seen my top books of the year, then you know that made it into my top 10 of the year and was one of my favorite fantasies of last year. So I was really excited to read Piranesi. This also was a Patreon vlog, so I take suggestions from my patrons and pick a book every month to read, and I do like a spoilery vlog for them. This was the most recommended book to me. I think I had 3 or 4 people all tell me that they wanted me to read this book, and so I was very excited to finally read it, and it totally lived up to the hype for me. There's not really a ton that I want to say about it, because I think I knew pretty much nothing about it going in, and I think that it's better that way. So kind of the only thing that I really want to say about this book is that it is about this man named Piranesi, and he's living in this house with many halls, and so it's very atmospheric, and you don't really know what's going on. You're kind of dropped in and you're getting his journal entries. So you kind of don't know a lot of what's going on, but it's very interesting. There's a lot of nods to C.S. Lewis within the context of the story, and actually the book actually kicks off with a quote from The Magician's Nephew, which is really interesting. So this book has a lot to say about a lot of different topics that I think are really valuable and are really poignant the way that she said it. And I still am not sure if it's like a full 5 stars for me or not, or if it's more like 4.5. I really, really loved it and really enjoyed it. Thought it was very mysterious, very atmospheric, very intriguing, very thought-provoking, but I liked Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell better, which I don't think is always the case for people. I do think that Piranesi is the more perfect book out of her 2 works. Like, it is perfectly paced and plotted, and it's just very tightly written, and I think that comes across really well, whereas Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell is more meandering. But as a result, I felt like I spent more time with the characters. I loved the characters in Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell more, and overall liked a little bit more what she was doing in that one than this one. But I really did love this, and I wish that she had more books I could read. The next book that I finished in January was The 10,000 Doors of January by Alex Harrow. This was for my in-person book club, and I have some mixed feelings about it. There are things about it that I just love. The prose in this book is everything. I posted on my Instagram on the actual feed, not just in the stories. I have 3 pages worth of quotes in my commonplace journal from this book because this prose is 10,000% for me, and I just love the way that it was written. The story is really intriguing. We follow a young girl named January, and she is growing up with a father that's traveling the world all the time, and so she's living with this rich man who's her father's employer, and he's kind of more like a stand-in father for her. And so we're following her as a child. She's very imaginative and precocious, and that kind of gets squashed down in her, and she learns about these doors that open into other worlds. And so it's very much a portal fantasy with a lot of really interesting elements to it. And I loved the prose in this book. Like I've already said, I loved the way that it was written, but I did have some issues with some of the way that the plot was executed. I felt like wasn't great. So I initially gave it 4 stars, and I might still be in the 4-star range. But after meeting with my in-person book club and realizing how many holes are in the plot of the story and how much of it just feels like kind of nonsensical in a not good way, in a way that I don't think was intentional, made me just kind of be like, oh yeah, actually, like, so much of this just doesn't make sense. And for a lot of them, they enjoyed the beginning because the prose was so good, but as the plot just became more and more convoluted, they liked it less and less. And so I understand that, and there was a lot of emotional things that happened towards the end of the book that I felt 0 emotion towards because I really wasn't all that attached to the characters, but the prose still saved it for me and still made it so I was so happy that I read it. The way that this book talks about emotions and grief and stories and the power of stories to connect, and how stories are doors that open us to other worlds, then also like relating to people in other worlds. And there's so much that is in it that is just so exquisitely written and expressed in such beautiful and poignant ways that I am still so glad that I read this book. And I still would say that overall I enjoyed it. I just like let my brain disengage with the parts that didn't make sense because the prose was so good. It allowed me to do that, and most of my book club did not feel that way, and the prose didn't save it enough for them to be able to just kind of like let go of those things, which is fine and totally fair. And I agree with every single one of their criticisms of this book. I agree, but the prose was enough that just like touched my heart so much with the prose. So speaking of nonsensical, but a book that's intentionally nonsensical, I also read The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy by Douglas Adams. I read this for Victoria from A Musical Bookworm's Patreon, and I've wanted to read this book for a while. Her book club is so fun because the patrons will suggest different genres. She spins a wheel, and then whatever genre it lands on, then everyone suggests books, and then whatever book it lands on is our book. So the genre that won was sci-fi, and this is actually the book that I suggested, and I'm so happy that it won because it's one I've wanted to read for a while. And this book was a lot of fun. I don't think it's really all that deep. There are things that Douglas Adams is trying to say, in particular, I think, with politics and just the way that, you know, people people come to power and just kind of some of the ridiculousness and poking fun at different things like that. There's definitely statements that he's making within this book, but it's just a lot of fun and there's a lot of hilarity in it. And one of the things is evidenced with the fact that it starts with this man whose house is being torn down by the city council, and he's like laying in the mud in front of his house and saying, "I refuse, like you cannot tear my house down." And they're like, "Well, we have to because we're making like an interstate here," and so, or something like that, some like interhighway. And then he finds out that his close friend is actually not actually human, and he's like, "I gotta get you off this planet because this planet's getting destroyed for an galactic highway." So it's happening on a grander scale as well, and it's just so ridiculous and so funny. Things like stowing away on like an alien ship, and what they end up doing, they want to torture them, and so they read them the poetry that they've written. And I mean, like, it's just funny. It's a lot of fun. There's a lot of scientific things in here that maybe are supposed to make sense. I think that has like some astrophysics and stuff like that in it, but I don't know anything about regular physics, much less astrophysics, and so that just went right over my head. And I was using this as a bedtime read, and so there were lots of times where it was really confusing for me, where I was like, what are you even saying? But when I'd read it during the daytime when I wasn't tired, it was really enjoyable. So that makes me think that the issues that I had with it are mostly a sleepy Tiffany issue and not so much an issue with the book itself. So overall, I gave it 4 stars. I thought it was super fun, really enjoyed it, glad that I read it. And if you saw my most recent thrift haul, you know that I found the next 4 books in this series for free at my library. So I will be continuing on with the series, but it's not really a pressing need. So for my Patreon book club this month, we kicked off our read along of Lord of the Rings. So we read The Fellowship of the Ring, and what a joy it was to read this book. I love it so much. This is one of my favorite and most reread series of all time, and so it was just glorious to be back with Tolkien's prose. Even though I read The Hobbit in December, there's something so special about Lord of the Rings, and there are things that I saw in it that I hadn't seen before, and there's just, you could see all the tabs. There's so many quotes and wonderful things that I just love, and the companionship in this book, the friendship and the deep relationships that are beginning or continuing in this book are so good, and I just cannot wait to reread The Two Towers in the month of February. So this is just such an easy 5 stars for me, but I already knew it would be because this is literally my 13th time reading this book. The last book that I finished in January is volume 2 of Kuma 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 Bear, and this is just such a fun, sweet manga series, and this is the 2nd volume. So it's about a girl who is obsessed with video games, and she plays virtual reality video games. So she's got like the headset on, and so she escapes into this world, and it's her favorite game, and she finds out that there's an update, and she is given this bear suit to wear, and she ends up in this totally different place than the game that she's used to. And this was, I mean, this is nothing really too deep about this manga series, but it's just such a fun palette cleanser, and it's just adorable. Like in this particular series, she finds out that she can summon these bears that can fight for her, or she can ride on them, and they're so cute. Like, oh my gosh, it's just really adorable. Lots of good humor, and so far the first 2 volumes at least have been just like very like clean and wholesome, and so they're ones that I may pass off to Claire, but I want to read more of them first just to make sure. I do still have more from my library because they had initially ordered the first 2 volumes, and I went on there and they have more that they ordered for me. So I'm really happy about that, and I'm really looking forward to continuing this manga series. Well, those are the books that I completed in the month of January. Like I said, I have a couple of books that I read the bulk of them in January, but I won't be talking about them until my February wrap up because I didn't finish them in January. But I would love to hear from you in the comments down below. What have you been reading in the month of January? Share with me what your favorite book is because I would love to hear that. My favorite was for sure Fellowship of the Ring, but that was a reread. So I guess maybe my second favorite that I finished was probably Piranesi. But I overall would say that I really enjoyed everything that I read this month. But I'd also love to hear if you've read any of the books that I read this month. I always love hearing your thoughts and chatting with you about that. Thank you so much for watching. If you like this video, please hit like and also subscribe so you can continue to see more bookish content from me. And I will see you again next time.